Anyone who here that is a parent knows that you're given many opportunities for teachable moments. But my question is, are we ever too old to learn? No. In fact, quite simply put, everything is a teachable moment. Every interaction with life at any age can be a teachable moment. Now, I want to give just a little history. I talked about the Jewish feasts, okay? Now, there are 3 Jewish feasts that if you are a Jew, that are required of you to attend. It's Passover, Pentecost, and Tabernacles, which is the Feast of Booths, which they go live and attend for a week. Now, Passover, though, is the most important. So if you were poor, or if you lived a very long way away, like Nazareth, and you could only go, because you had to walk, you could only go to one feast out of the whole year, Passover was the most important. Okay, that was a non-negotiable. So that's where we find Joseph and Mary going. Now just a little tidbit history on Passover, so that way you just kind of understand it. For those of you who might not remember, Passover started when the Israelites were subject to Pharaoh in Egypt. They'd been slaves. And a man named Moses, how many know Moses? Know Moses? Heard of him? Maybe? Sort of? 10 Commandments? Okay. God sent Moses to the Israelites and to Pharaoh to free them. And the night before they were freed, they had the Passover. So in order to do that, they set up a celebration and a holiday to remember it every year, so that way they would not forget what God had done for them. So we're talking thousands of years. The Jews come to Jerusalem every year for Passover. Now, for Christians, we have 2 holidays like that we always remember that's gone on over 2,000 years. And that would be what? Christmas, birth of Christ, and Easter, which is when Jesus arose from the dead. All right, now I want to give you a little tidbit about Jerusalem. We hear it in the news, and we read about it, but we don't really know what Jerusalem's like. Now, the city's normal population is about 25,000. But at Passover, there's over 100,000 people in this town. Now, why? I did a little math, or a little research here. All right, this is Jerusalem right here. It is 0.35 square miles, and it's a walled town. Now, to give you guys some idea, McCool Junction is 0.47 square miles. So McCool Junction is bigger than Jerusalem. So to make it about the same, you have to cut off everything south of the blacktop. All right, now I want you to envision this. 100,000 people in McCool Junction is the same as having everybody from Grand Island, Hastings, Columbus, York, and McCool all crammed into that one spot. Kind of hard to wrap your mind around. Guess what? 100,000 people would be everybody at the Nebraska football stadium, plus all the vendors outside and everybody else working that entire game. Everybody sitting right in McCool from Blacktop North. That's a lot of people, isn't it? They're on top of each other, literally. And this happens every year. So, if you can imagine that, would it be real easy if you got lost from your parents? Would it be real easy to find them? Especially if you weren't from there? I'm kind of thinking of just Mustang Roundup. I had a hard time finding my kids in McCool Junction and Mustang Roundup, and there was like, thousands of the people there. All right, well, when the people would travel, now we're going from Nazareth, Galilee down to Jerusalem, they would travel in huge numbers for safety because there was robbers and bandits along that whole road, and so you never went by yourself. So they would go in large groups of family and friends. But when they did that, well, it's kind of like nowadays. The girls and women would all go off on one side and walk and talk, and the men would all go the other way and walk and talk, and usually the kids were between the two or with their mom. So they could literally go almost the whole thing and hardly ever see their spouse. All right, now a boy, this is a little tidbit too for Jewish history, a boy was a child until the age of 12. Then he was considered an adult. So this is why finding Jesus in the temple marks a pivotal moment in his life because he had been a boy and now he's finally a man. Why does that matter? Right here, I'm going to show you. This part here is the courtyard in the temple. And the women and the children could only go there. They weren't allowed to go into the main part of the temple. Only the men. So now that Jesus is actually 12, he's crossed over, guess what? He doesn't have to be with the little kids and his mom anymore. He gets to go in the main part of the temple with his dad. This is huge. Now, I just wanted to show you here on the map. This is Jerusalem. okay? And there is Nazareth. So on a straightaway strip with no mountains, no valleys, nothing. It's 63.5 miles, and that's by road. Unfortunately, though, that's not how they traveled. It was horrible, rugged, terrible terrain. It was over 80 miles to go from Nazareth to Jerusalem. And it would have taken about 3 days to try to travel that. But now with cars and roads, you can do it in less than 2 hours. Would you like to walk that way? 3 days? No? Wouldn't have been much fun. Well, Jesus' parents, they just kind of assumed that he was with the other one. Because he's right at 12. So, well, would he still be hanging with his mom and maybe some of the younger ones? Would he be in the middle with his bunch of friends? Or maybe because he was a man, now he was traveling with his dad and in that camp. So, they really don't think too much about it. I want to ask, when you guys go to the mall, and let's say maybe your parents take you there, but you go with some friends and you run off, do they know exactly where you're at? I don't have a clue, do they? They assume that you're still with your friends and that you're still running around, and eventually you guys will meet up, but they don't know that for sure. All right, so I want to ask, now that we've done our background, I want to ask here, how do you tell time? I'm going to ask the kids. What's your answer? If I was to ask you what time it was, how are you going to tell me what time it is? Off of a clock. But on you right now, do you have a clock on you? No. Okay. Go ahead. Your phone. Thank you. The adult says here, the cell phone. How many people know what this thing is?
That's a watch.
See, if you're under the age of me, you don't know what a watch is. Because if you ask anybody now, what time is it? What do? They whip out their phone and they look at it, right? So let me ask you, what if you didn't have your phone? What if you got grounded or you lost it? What would you do?
Look at the sun.
Look at the sun. Get out the sundial. All right. What if your parents said, we're going to go to the state fair, and you didn't have your cell phone, so you couldn't call them. And they said, we want you to meet back here. You can go to whatever you want, but at 4 o'clock, we're going to meet you. How do you think they would set that up? How would you know what to do? See, when I was growing up, because we didn't have phones, we had watches. And if my dad let us do that, we had one spot that he always said, we'll come back here and meet. If we ever get lost, this is the spot we'll meet you at. And we'll meet you at this time. So we had our watch, and we could go off and do whatever we wanted so long as we were back at that time. Well, I can't help but think that maybe that isn't what they did back then. Because how else would you be able to find your family unless you had a meeting spot? If you had 100,000 people in a very, very small area, you wouldn't be able to find each other, would you? All right, as Mary and Joseph were walking away, they had gone probably about 25 miles. And that's when they realized, Jesus isn't with us. I thought he was with you. I thought he was with you. And they started asking all the friends. And they started asking everybody. They didn't have mass texting where they could just send out an alert to everybody. They didn't have the Amber Alert. They were looking all over for Jesus. And they finally realized that nobody's seen him since they left. What do you think was going through their minds right about that time? Panic, fear, anger. But who knows? If they didn't actually personally go and get him and bring them with him, they couldn't get too mad at him. So they start their long trek of 25 miles back into town. Now, I talked about football Saturday. How many here have ever gone to a football game? Okay? How many here have ever gone to like a concert at a concourse, an arena? Have you ever tried to walk against the crowd? Like an intermission? Or before, and everybody's going this way and you're trying to go that way? It's impossible. You'll just stand there forever until you don't have to go to the bathroom anymore. At least that's what happens when we go on these women conferences. Because you can't get where you want to go. Everybody's just constantly coming and coming and coming, and you can't weave your way through. So imagine that that's probably a lot of what Mary and Joseph had to do when they were trying to get back to Jerusalem and everybody was leaving Jerusalem. There was a big throng. So they get back there and they're frantically searching all over rapping on doors, talking to people, have you seen, have you seen, have you seen? And they finally get to the temple. And who did they see? But Jesus. And he's sitting there, listening and talking with the scholars. So what would you do if you were in Jesus' shoes and you didn't have your cell phone and you didn't have any way to get a hold of your mom or your dad? Now, Jesus has been there 3 days, and I think that's interesting that we have another 3-day. What other big 3-day was in the Bible? And Jesus was crucified and he was put in the grave, and before he rose on the 3rd day. The 3rd day, his folks find him. I find it interesting that he didn't get scared, he didn't get worried that he hadn't seen his parents. He was so engrossed in what they were telling him. Now you have to realize this is a pivotal point, because he went from being 12 to all of a sudden from being a child to being a man. And now he can go to the temple and he can listen to him and he can ask him questions. Now why I'm getting to this point is because Jesus was special. Who is he?
Son of God.
He's the Son of God. Now, everything in the scripture says Mary pondered all these things in her heart, so I can't help but think that he hadn't heard some talking. I cannot believe that Mary did not ever say anything to him about maybe being a little more special boy. And he's listening to the scriptures and the scrolls being read for the first time. And all of a sudden he starts going, wait a minute. The Messiah is to be born in Bethlehem? He's supposed to be born of a virgin? He's supposed to come from the line of King David. He's listening to all these and he's starting to put the pieces together. And I cannot help but think that all of a sudden Jesus goes, can that be me? That there isn't an awakening. Yet this is hard because Jesus was God and he was also human. So God let him lead a human life. But he's starting to realize that I have been put on this earth for more than helping my dad out. And he starts thinking about this. And this realization, if you found out that you were adopted, or let's say you found out that maybe you were of royal blood and you didn't know it, and all of a sudden you start putting the pieces together and you go, oh, wait a minute. And you start discovering who you are. What kind of feelings do you think you would have? Would it make a difference? Would it make you not want to know more and more and more and more? And that's what Jesus was doing. He was sitting at the feet, soaking in as much information as he could possibly get. He was riveted on what they were talking about. And then his mom and dad come on the scene. And they go, oh my gosh, we're so glad we found you. And then they go, do you know what you just put us through? We probably didn't say that back then. But I can guarantee if it was your parents now, that's exactly what they would say. Yeah. Would your mom be scared to death if you got lost? You don't know? I bet she would. And when she found you, she would be so relieved. But at the same time, she'd be mad because they just walked 25 miles all the way back to town. It wasn't like they jumped in the car and drove about half an hour. So they get Jesus. And he says, and what does he say to him? He says, oh, I'm sorry. He says, why were you looking for me? Didn't you know I'd be at my Father's house? See, over those 3 days, he has come to the realization that he is the Son of God. He gets it. He knows who he is. He's just like any other teenager before, wondering, who am I? How do I fit into this whole thing? I think there's more. I know there's more because I feel it down inside, but I just don't know what it is exactly. And all the pieces of that puzzle start coming together, and he knows without a doubt that he is now the Son of God. And he doesn't mean it to be mad or to be sarcastic to his parents. He's just saying, I know you know. And now you know I know. And I am here learning everything I possibly can. It says, and then after that, he packed up and he went home with them. And he continued to grow in wisdom and stature. So I want to ask you, do you know what the difference is between knowledge and wisdom? Knowledge is anything you can read in a book, anything in life you can experience, anything you can come to know on this earth. And then there's wisdom. And wisdom is what comes from God. It's stuff that he tells you that's the only way you can know. You can't learn it from earth. And that's exactly what it says Jesus was doing. He was growing in wisdom. God was filling him with his purpose and who he was and what his destiny was and what his ministry would become. See, God's talking to each and every one of you, and especially at this point in your life. But you're going to go through it many, many, many times down this journey of seeking and wondering. I bet you if you asked anybody here, they would probably admit that even when they hit 50 and 60 or after retirement, they found themselves going, okay, God, now what? What do you have for me to do? What's my purpose? Who am I? What have I actually accomplished so far? Is there more? Or was that it? We all find ourselves asking that. And the cool thing is God has an answer for you, and it's never that's it. There is a ton more that he wants you to do, that he wants you to accomplish, that he has all lined up for you. As we talked last week, there is no retirement in the Bible. I looked. He can use us until the last breath in our body. So, I want you to think about this time as being an exciting time. And if you don't have all the pieces put together and you don't really feel like you fit in and you don't know where you're at in this world, take heart. Neither did Jesus. But he did the smart thing. He went to the temple and he sat at the feet of the elders and he listened to the scriptures. And it was through those words that he finally got it and put it together. Amen.